Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Xanadu Gallery's Secrets of Shipping Your Art, Part 2. This evening we're going to be talking about sculpture and three-dimensional art. I'm your host, Jason Horsch, owner of Xanadu Gallery. And as we begin this evening, I want to spend just a few moments talking about how the webinar will work. I know that some of you have attended before, but for some of you this is your first time. There are going to be a couple different ways that you can participate in the course of our 30 to 35, 40-minute broadcast this evening. Obviously, you can listen and watch on your computer, but this is a good format in the sense that it can be interactive, and there will be time for you to be able to ask questions. We do have a large number of attendees online this evening, so I may not be able to get to all of the questions, but I'll try to get to as many as I can. And there are a couple of different ways that you can ask questions. If you have a microphone either built into your computer or an external microphone, you can ask a question audibly by raising your hand, and you'll see the small hand button on the right-hand side of your screen in the control box that was loaded when you started watching the webinar. And then I'll know that you have a question and I can bring you online. You can also enter questions into the question box, which is also on the right-hand side of your screen, and I'll be able to see those questions come up. My plan this evening is to take some questions during the course of the evening, and then toward the end of the evening I'll have a slight pause while I go through all the questions that have come in and try and respond to as many as I can during a question and answer period. And finally, there will be a couple of polls during the course of the evening where you can input your response to my question. You'll be able to see the responses of other attendees in the workshop. Our topic this evening, this is really a continuation of a conversation that I started a couple of weeks ago during the broadcast. 2 weeks ago, we talked about shipping paintings. And certainly shipping two-dimensional art is a challenge, but it pales in comparison to the challenges that those of you who are shipping three-dimensional art face each time you ship art. My goals are the same. I want to make sure that the artwork arrives safely, and I want to make sure that the packaging looks professional and that the collectors who are receiving the artwork will be impressed and get a sense that we value the artwork that we're shipping to them. I wanted to just briefly give you a little bit of background why I even have any position to talk about shipping, and I mentioned this during the workshop a couple weeks ago, but I basically started out in the art business doing shipping for a large Western art gallery. I was hired when I was still an adolescent, and my first duties in the gallery were to help with logistics, hanging shows, and then also working in the back room to ship artwork that had sold out to clients or ship pieces back to artists. So I've been doing it a long time. I started working for them back in the early 90s, so it's been almost 20 years now. And during the course of the last 20 years, I have shipped thousands of pieces of artwork, I'm sure. And even though I don't ship as much as I used to anymore, I'm not physically involved in it, I still from time to time do get involved in that process just to make sure that everything's being shipped the way it needs to from our gallery. And so over the course of those years, I've learned some tricks. I've also learned to try and keep the shipping as inexpensive as possible, while at the same time maintaining a high level of quality in the items that we're shipping out, the way that we're shipping them. And I know that as an artist, this is pretty important for you as well, to be able to find a way to efficiently and safely ship your artwork while staying in your budget. I want to begin this evening talking about, well, and before I do that, I want to quickly launch our first poll, and it is following up on that first point of making sure artwork arrives safely. I want to ask how many of you have had artwork damaged in shipping? And we'll leave just a few seconds here for you to answer this poll. And I can tell you that I am certainly not immune to damage in artwork, damage in shipping. But over the course of years, we've been able to minimize that. And it's to the point where I now expect that as far as three-dimensional art goes, about 1 out of every 50 to anywhere between 50 and 80 pieces, 1 out of every 50 to 80 pieces will be damaged in shipping. overall I'd say that's a pretty good percentage. And usually the damage that we're getting is not catastrophic. It's something that can be repaired in most cases, or there are times where we have to file claims, and we'll talk about that a little bit this evening as well. So let me go ahead and close this poll and share the results. Out of the respondents, you can see that we're pretty close to evenly split as far as how many people have had artwork damaged in shipping. And let's start by talking about the various tools of shipping. And these are my preferred tools for shipping artwork, and it looks like we have a little bit of a delay in images coming up on your screen, so I'll take it slowly. These are my primary tools when it comes to shipping artwork out of the gallery. And let me say that obviously these are some pretty simple tools, and also that this is when I'm shipping medium-sized to smaller-sized pieces out of the gallery, and I'll define that a little bit better later on. And I'll also tell you that I rarely ship large artwork out of the gallery ourselves. We will hire a professional, come in and do the larger pieces. These are for the manageable pieces. Of these tools, the first is the palette wrap. I actually use that more in shipping two-dimensional artwork. It does not work as well in shipping three-dimensional artwork, especially anything that is fragile, glass, ceramics, because the problem with the palette wrap is that it works by creating a little tension and pressure on the artwork. And of course, that's exactly what you do not want to have when you're shipping anything that's delicate. And so that would be an item that I may occasionally use on a bronze sculpture if I need an added layer of protection, but typically I'm not going to use it. The second item is the box sizer, which is also known as a carton sizer. And you're going to see in just a few minutes that this is one of my most important tools that I use to be able to customize boxes and make them fit the artwork well. And if you don't have a box sizer in your in your studio that you can use for shipping, this would be one of my first suggestions for you, is that you go to uline.com and just type in carton sizer, and you'll see that this comes up. It's a relatively inexpensive tool, but it makes it easy for you to customize the boxes that you're using. And again, I'll show you how in just a few minutes. And then, of course, the other tools are my faithful Sharpie, my knife, tape measure, tape gun, and, of course, our T-square. And again, the T-square is another critical tool. If you're doing any kind of customization of boxes before you ship, you definitely want to be using the T-square to get everything squared up. Now, as far as supplies for shipping three-dimensional artwork, I almost always will ship smaller artworks in corrugated boxes. Over the years, I've been tempted to use wood crates for some items. For example, we ship a lot of glass out of the gallery, blown plates, fused glass, that kind of thing. And as we started shipping those several years ago, of course, there was a learning curve with that, and we definitely had some damage in the beginning. And I suspected that wood crates would do better for us in shipping the fragile items. And it turned out actually to be exactly the opposite of that. We found that anything we were shipping with FedEx or UPS, if we were shipping it in a wood crate, our damage rate seemed to go up substantially. And I've talked to my UPS representative and to several of my drivers, and the consensus that comes back to me is that UPS and FedEx are simply not equipped really to deal with wood crates, which tend to be heavy. And the suspicion was that they're getting jarred around and dropped more frequently than the boxes, which are lighter and easier to handle. So I found that corrugated serves me better, even with the fragile items that we're shipping out. And again, almost exclusively for smaller items, we'll be shipping in corrugated. I suggest that you try to order your boxes in bulk. If your artwork has any kind of standard sizes, you're going to find that it's much more economical and more convenient to be ordering in bulk. And in the resource section at the end of this broadcast, I will show you and give you some resources as far as where you might be able to order these things. You know, I'm just realizing I've had a couple of you email or come in with questions saying that it looks like you're getting part 1, and I just realized in the slideshow up at the top you're seeing the secrets of shipping art, and it says part 1. This is actually part 2. We used the same template, and apparently I didn't get that corrected, so you are in the right session. Next is bubble wrap. I order this by sometimes 2 and 3 rolls at a time. You always want to have plenty of it on hand. I almost exclusively will order the 24-inch wide, 1-inch bubble, so that's the larger bubble. And I always try to get it perfed at 12 inches. So every 12 inches you'll have a perforation, and it makes it very easy to measure out the bubble and then also to tear it off instead of having to cut it. And I find that that's a more accurate and more efficient way to use the bubble wrap. Obviously, you can get it in different widths. And from time to time, depending on the project, I may also get the small bubbles. But by and large, I'm using this 24-inch wide, 1-inch bubble, and with the 12-inch perforation. And then tape. Tape is another critical item for you, and as I mentioned a couple of weeks ago in my broadcast, I am a packing tape snob. I always try and order the very thickest, best tape that I can. I found that I'll be using less of it and have fewer problems in shipping if I'm using a high-quality tape. So I almost always order the 3.5 millimeter, and that is a very thick, heavy-duty tape. I just find that it's a huge waste of time to order anything that is thinner than that because I end up having to put on multiple layers, and again, sometimes I'll lose adhesion on the boxes. So I prefer to have the heavier, thicker tape. And then peanuts. I order the peanuts just like you're going to see them on your screen here. It's, I believe, a 15 cubic foot bag of the pink styrofoam peanuts. As I mentioned a couple weeks ago, I never use these in packing 2-dimensional artwork, but I use them extensively when we're packaging 3-dimensional artwork. Fragile stickers. These I also order in large rolls from Uline, and I use them liberally on the packages that we're shipping out. But I found that fragile stickers are something that make me feel better about the shipment. They make my collector feel better about it. But the reality is that I think a fragile sticker has about 0 impact on your carrier, UPS, FedEx. You know, I doubt they even notice that they're there, and the joke that I heard was that if you put fragile stickers all over it, they'll just toss it underhand instead of throwing it overhand. So, you know, it may reduce your damage marginally, but primarily I do it so that my collector sees that that we care. Now, for our first example this evening, I'm going to show you packing up a piece of glass. This I feel is a good example because there is just nothing more fragile than glass, and especially the shape of the wall plate. It is going to be subject to some pressure that could very easily break it. So packaging it is definitely a fine art. And if you can master packing a piece of glass and have it arrive safely, you can pretty much count on being able to package and ship anything. My first step is going to be to size the piece. This particular piece that you're seeing on your screen measures approximately 14 inches in diameter, and it has a depth of about 6 inches. So as I'm sizing, the minimum clearance that I'm looking for is 2 inches in every direction. So for this piece, my inner box is going to need to have a minimum of 18 inches. It's going to need to be at least 18 by 18. And the outer box is going to need to be at least 22 by 22. And so you can see what I'm actually doing there is giving myself 2 full inches all the way around on my inner box, and then 2 full inches beyond that all the way around on my outer box. That is more clearance than UPS requires in their policies and as far as making a claim against insurance. But I found that having that extra buffer greatly reduces the amount of damage that I see in shipping. So I always try to have that total of 4 inches, and that just gives me some room to move and some room to pad. So my first step in packaging this particular piece of artwork is the bubble wrap. And basically you can see I've already pulled out the bubble wrap, I've torn it, and I've taken out about 6 feet of bubble wrap for my first layer. I'll lay the piece on top of it and then just fold the bubble wrap. Well, actually what I've done is I've doubled the bubble wrap initially, placed the piece on top of it, and then I folded the bubble wrap over the top. So I've got basically 2 layers of bubble wrap initially. I'll tape it together, and then I also come back and tape the ends together. And I'm creating this first layer of a cocoon for the bubble. Then I'll come back in. You see me there taping the end. And then I'll actually come back with another about 6 feet of bubble wrap and put another layer on it. So I've got a total of about 4 layers of bubble wrap. There's extra padding on the sides and in the corners, and that gives me a nice buffer for the piece in my inner box. Now, for this example, you're going to see me working first on the inner box. For this example, I actually chose a box that was not quite the right size, that was a little bit too large, so you could see me doing some customization. I try to do that as little as possible. You know, if at all possible, I will try and order exactly the right size boxes. But you know, with unusually or awkwardly shaped pieces, sometimes you just don't have on hand that exact size that you need. So I'm going to show some customization here. I'll basically take that box and start to do some surgery. I'll use my T-square and then cut the box in half in essence. So I'll line it, use my blade to score the box, take the 2 halves of the box, and then overlap them. And I'm hoping you'll be able to see this in the picture here. I've got a couple of pictures that I'll show you. So I've overlapped it, and by doing that, hold on, we're waiting for the images to catch up here. You see it all getting taped together. And then by doing that, what I've done is create a tighter fit for the glass inside the inner box. My goal when I'm packaging is that I do want to allow plenty of space. On the other hand, I don't want to have tons of extra space for 2 reasons. One, it costs me more when I ship it, and you know, when you start getting into dimensional weight. But the second is that I just want to keep things as tight as possible so there's no movement. I don't want to be using tons of material. And also, if it gets too big, you start running into problems with it getting hit by other packages or the higher likelihood of being dropped. So you can see I've placed the glass in the box. There's still a little bit of space around it, so my next step is to put in some additional bubble. In this inner box, the only filler material that I'll use is bubble wrap. I'm not going to use peanuts on the inner box, and the reason is simple. Peanuts allow movement. So for the inner box, I want to isolate the piece and decrease the movement as much as possible. My goal with the bubble is to add a little bit of padding, but primarily it's to immobilize that piece. And so I'm not going to use any peanuts on the inner box. I'm going to fill it. Any filling that I need to do, I'm going to do with the bubble. And then you can see that I've now closed this box. And this inner box is a fairly tight fit. And I say that with a caveat. I don't want to make it so tight that it starts putting pressure on the glass. My goal is to have it tight enough that there's not going to be any movement. I could pick that box up and shake it around and move it back and forth, and I'm not going to get any movement. But on the other hand, there can still be a little bit of flex in the box. I don't want it so tight that there's going to be pressure transmitting through the box, through the bubble, and to the glass. Now, here's another picture of that. You can just see that it's nice and tight and clean. And even though this inner box has been modified, it's I've performed some surgery on it. The lines were all cut very efficiently, and it still comes out to a nice square. And now let's go to the outer box. And again, with this outer box, I deliberately selected a box that was larger than we needed for shipping this particular piece of glass, because I, again, wanted to show you some modification. So again, I'm going to show you that, that box cutting tool. And this carton sizer is just, again, an awesome tool to have in your toolbox. Here you can see that I needed to decrease the size of the box by 6 inches. So I select 6 inches with the guide, tighten that up, and then you fold the flaps of the box down, as you're going to see in the next image, and the box sizer sits on the crease. And then you simply, it has a little wheel on it with a blade, which I'm going to show you more closely in just a second. And you just pull that box sizer along the side of the box and kind of push it into the cardboard. And then you'll see what's happening, and hopefully you can see it in this image. It's a little tight in the detail, but what it's doing is just basically scoring the box straight across the side. And as I pull that along, you'll see in this next image the blade that is causing the score. And then once I have my score all the way around the box, I'll take a knife and cut up the 4 corners. I start at the score and cut my way up. And basically I now have a new top to this box that's been created by the score and then the score in the corner as well. And now I can fold that over very easily, and it just folds right along that score line, and my box has now shrunk to the size that I need it to be. My next step is to add a layer of peanuts to the bottom, and I've put about 2 inches of peanuts at the bottom of this box. And the small inner box is then going to fit inside there. So you'll see it going in the next image. And again, this inner box is going to be 2 inches from the side of the outer box, and I filled that all up with peanuts. Now, again, the purpose of the peanuts here, yes, it's going to help isolate that inner box, but basically you're looking for some shock absorption. So any hits that the outer box take will be absorbed by the cardboard and the peanuts, and you won't have any transmission of the tension or the stress from the hit from the outside to the inside. At least that's the goal. So you've kind of got a dual layer of protection between your outer box and your inner box, between the peanuts and the bubble wrap. I then fill the rest of the way up with peanuts. And I'm not sure if you can see it in this image, but I've gone just a little bit above the score. What I'm doing is overfilling just a little bit because I find that there's some compression with the peanuts. Not much. You don't want to have a full inch over the top of the score, but if you just give yourself a half an inch above that score and then close the top, and here again you can see where it's going along the score to fold down, and then tape it tightly closed. It's really going to help to isolate that inner box. And finally here you'll see that I have taped along all of the edges of this box. So my philosophy with the tape, again, I'm using the best tape that I can, and I am also making sure that everything is taped tight, and I'm using as much as I need to, because even though it's a more expensive packing tape, I figure tape is cheap compared to damage. So again, I just want to make sure that everything is tight and closed and sealed. And so I'll even tape along the seams along the side of the box if there are any, and the same to the top and bottom of the box. Then I wanted to show you that this method of packing can work for sculpture as well as glass. And basically the process is the same, so I'm going to move through pretty quickly. But here's an example of a sculpture that is potentially pretty fragile. It is a ceramic piece three-dimensional. It's got some smaller, more delicate pieces. My first step in wrapping that in bubble wrap is to do almost the same thing that I did with the glass, and that is that I'll pull off, in this case it was 4 feet of bubble wrap. I double it over, and then I place the sculpture on top of the bubble, fold it over, and wrap it. And what I'm doing here is basically creating an oval of bubble wrap around the sculpture. I'll tape it lightly, and then I'll come back in and, hold on just a second here, tape the ends. And then once again, I'm going into an inner box, and again, I'm using bubble to fill in any additional space that I need to fill. Again, my goal here is to just absolutely isolate that inner piece from moving around at all. Now, the other thing I should mention here, and I could have mentioned it with the glass as well, when you are wrapping your sculpture in bubble wrap, you do want to be a little bit careful not to go crazy with the tape. The problem being not that it can be damaged during the transportation, but the problem is sometimes if you over tape the bubble wrap, your piece will actually get damaged by the recipient at the other end as they're trying to unwrap it, and they inadvertently pull too hard on something that they shouldn't have or drop the piece. You want to make it somewhat easy for them to unwrap. And if we, especially with the glass, we will often write instructions, open with care, remove this tape first, etc. Anything to help give them hints on how they can best unwrap the piece. And my advice when someone's in the gallery and we're talking to them about receiving the pieces, we let them know that the best way to unpack fragile artwork is to open the box in a bedroom and then pull the bubble wrapped piece out and place it on a bed and unwrap on the bed so they're not dropping it on a hard floor or table or something like that. And that seems to have worked well for us over the years. Now, when it comes to, I mentioned earlier that I have certain limits. Up to a certain size, I will go ahead and ship the piece or have the gallery ship the piece. But beyond that, I'll always hire a professional. And here's kind of my rule of thumb. If I can have it go UPS or FedEx in their normal size, I mean, it could be, it's always so confusing, all the various sizes that they have. But basically, if it's under 130 inches for the combined length plus 2 times the width and 2 times the height, then I'll go ahead and ship FedEx. Larger than that, and I'm going to either have a custom cardboard crate made or a custom wood crate manufactured for me. And I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, early on, as I owned the gallery, I actually had access to a wood shop and would build many of my own wood crates. And, I thought I was being frugal and efficient, and could do it in my off hours, and I do enjoy working with my hands. So I built many of our wood crates initially, but I found that as I started bidding it out and having a professional shipper do it, it actually would cost me less to use a professional than it was costing me to do it myself, and it was certainly costing me a lot of time in the wood shop to build crates. So a shipper, a professional crater, may cost more to build the crate, but they can usually save you quite a bit on the air freight or truck freight because they do a higher volume of shipping than you will. And so I found that, at least in my instance, it almost always comes out even. If I am shipping larger artworks myself, I typically will avoid FedEx freight or one of the other freight companies in favor of an expediter like Bel Air, which you can see on your screen there. And if you look them up at bellair.com, you can see the services that they offer. And I find that they are much, much less expensive than some of the other freight forwarders, or some of the other carriers like FedEx Freight or UPS Freight. Sometimes as much as their cost will be a quarter or even just a tenth of what FedEx Freight has quoted me. Now, when it comes to insurance, and let me go ahead and launch another poll here as we're getting started on this conversation. And that is, how many of you insure your artwork when you are shipping it out? And I can certainly understand those of you who don't, simply because it can be quite expensive, and a lot of times the expense of insurance outweighs the cost when you consider the that hopefully you're not having too much damage and that your material costs and time are not too high. But on the other hand, and I'm going to go ahead and close the poll now, and this result is exactly what I expected, and that was that 93% of you do insure your artwork when you're shipping it out. Only 7% are saying no. And even though I feel like sometimes it can be a huge hassle to file a claim, almost more than anything, it's the peace of mind and also just the reality that I've experienced that if I insure the artwork, somehow FedEx, UPS, or my other carriers seem to have a lower damage rate. That may just be superstition on my part, but I prefer to have it insured and have them have some some investment in moving the piece safely as well. When it comes to insurance, though, typically my philosophy when I'm working with, and let me go ahead and close the poll out here. When I'm working with UPS, I will typically insure the artwork, and this goes no matter what the value is. I'll insure it with UPS for just under $1,000. That basically is their limit before they start inspecting pieces and before you have to go through extra paperwork. And with FedEx, it's for $500. Bel Air, it's $1,000. Now, I can do that because I carry a separate policy with my own insurance carrier that will cover any additional damage. So, you want to really think about what your exposure is, what the risks are of damage. And I certainly would encourage you to over-insure. You wouldn't want to be spending too much money on that, but on the other hand, you want to be covered in case there is damage. So weigh that pretty carefully. Now, another question that often comes up when I'm talking about shipping artwork is, who's going to cover the costs of shipping? And with our gallery, we have a pretty consistent policy, and that is that usually the gallery is going to ask you to pick up the cost of getting the artwork from the studio to the gallery, and then if the piece doesn't sell or needs to be shipped back, typically the gallery will pick up the cost of getting it back to you. And if we sell a piece, the client almost always will pick up the cost of shipping the piece from the gallery to their home. So you just want to kind of, as you're building relationships with galleries, you want to make sure that's one of the first questions that you ask them, or that it's laid out in the consignment agreement, that you understand who's going to be responsible for the costs of shipping. I want to go ahead and give you a couple of resources that I use, and then I'll go ahead and open up for a question and answer period. And so if you want to go ahead and start putting some of your questions into the question box, or if you have a question and a microphone, you can raise your hand and I can bring you online. And as I'm doing that, I'm going to show you some of the resources that I use. For my supplies, I used to have a local supplier that could get me boxes and bubble wrap and all that kind of thing. But unfortunately, they went out of business or changed ownership several years ago. And since then, I've been ordering almost everything from Uline, uline.com. They are a large company, and they have locations all around the country and can usually get me items overnight for shipping. Again, using them allows me to order in bulk, so rarely do I ever just pick up one box. I'll always order in lots of 10 and then keep the others on hand so that I can have them for future use. Again, let me go ahead and bring this up. And let me go ahead, I'm going to go offline for just about 1 minute and 30 seconds while I look over some of the questions that you're putting. Again, if you want to ask questions audibly, go ahead and raise your hand and I'll bring you on, and I will be back in 1 minute to take those questions. And we're back. And I've got a number of good questions here. I'm going to try starting with an audible question. We'll see. Sometimes we have technical challenges with this. But I want to start by going to Carol Brooks. And Carol, if I can bring you online. Are you there, Carol?
I don't know. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, yes, I can. What is your question?
Okay. Well, I just realized from watching this, and it's been very helpful, that my artwork, which are wall constructions, and so they're, even though they're sort of sculpture, they are in structures that are stretched canvas, that I need to probably ship them more like paintings. And I was wondering if there was any way to see part one in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, I will, this evening or first thing tomorrow, I'll send out a link that will give you access to a recording of the session tonight, and I'll also include the link to the session that we had a couple of weeks ago so you can watch both of those. But, you know, you are probably facing some of the same challenges with 3D, you know, where you've got to make sure that it's isolated and that you're not having any movement. But did you have any other questions?
Right. That was my main question, was just that I think that it's sort of like a combination, but I think it's more, they're more, like rectangular structures that I need to wrap more like a painting, I think.
Yep. Well, I will definitely send that out, and I'm glad you brought that up because I wanted to mention that there will be access to a recording of this version. And then let me take a couple of questions that I've gotten via the question box. And one of those is that, and this comes from, let me move it here. And this comes from, I believe her name is Kat, and that is, what about irregular, fragile protrusions on ceramic sculpture or delicate outside surface protrusions? And, you know, that does bring up a good point. The two pieces that we shipped didn't really have a lot of the tiny, delicate pieces. Boy, those can just be a real challenge to ship. If we're shipping anything that has very small, delicate protrusions, my philosophy then is to go to a very fine, small bubble wrap for my first layer. And basically, I will gently wrap that piece to isolate some of those protrusions. And if they're very, very delicate, sometimes we'll even go to kind of an added process of using cardboard inside to build around the stronger parts of the sculpture, but to create a kind of exoskeleton for the piece that would keep any bubble wrap or any pressure away from the extremely delicate points. But it is a huge challenge. You know, there are some people who use the blown-in foam for that kind of thing. I found that that's actually not the best way to go, because that foam, if it's formed too tightly around a fragile piece, can actually cause it to break. So it is definitely a challenge. The goal is just to isolate those small protrusions and try and keep them from getting any kind of contact or pressure. Here's another question, and this, let me just get to all of it here. There have been a couple of questions about international shipping. Basically, my advice is the same, and I am going to have a session devoted completely to international shipping, hopefully within the next month to month and a half, because there are some specific caveats to shipping internationally. But basically, my advice is the same. You want to use some extra padding, give yourself some extra space, and then I use my same carrier, Bel Air Express, and even with smaller pieces in this instance, I use Bel Air, and I find that they've been able to get artwork overseas much less expensively than some of the big carriers. And again, we will have a session on that. You know, we have unfortunately come to the end of our time this evening, and I see that there are quite a number of questions that I have not been able to get to, and it does look like international shipping is a big one of those, so we'll be sure and have that session, and I will let you know when it's coming up. And also, I hope to have in the coming months someone from UPS. I've been talking to a UPS representative, and they are going to come online with me and talk specifically about things that you can do to basically get through their claims system if you have problems and things that you should make sure you're doing so that you can collect on insurance. But it has been a pleasure having you with me this evening. Continue this discussion online. If you go to Facebook and just type in to the search box, Xanadu Gallery, you'll see that Successful Art Marketing is one of our pages that will come up right away. And there is a discussion tab there where you can put in questions, and I will monitor that and come back and respond. Or you can email me directly at jason@xanadugallery.com with specific questions. It may take me several days to get back to you. My inbox is always full, but I'm happy to do that. And don't forget to friend me. I am on Facebook and Twitter, and love to keep in touch with all of you. One final thing that